The first chill of autumn had arrived, and with it the peculiar stillness that settles over old neighborhoods when the sun dips below the horizon. It was a silence that felt heavy, expectant, as if the world was holding its breath for the turning of the year. For an old man named Arthur, sitting in his worn armchair, it was a silence he knew all too well. His house, a relic from a time of craftsmanship and sturdy oak, creaked and groaned around him, its sounds as familiar as the rhythm of his own heartbeat. But on this night, the eve of Halloween, the sounds were different. They were not the comfortable sighs of an aging structure settling into the cold earth, but something else, something deliberate. It began with a faint scratching, like the branch of the ancient maple in the yard tapping against the upstairs window. Arthur had dismissed it at first, his book held open in his liver-spotted hands, but the tapping didn't follow the wind's erratic rhythm. It was a pattern. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. He lowered his book, his brow furrowed. The house fell silent again, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. He was about to return to his reading when a new sound reached him, a soft, shuffling footstep in the hall just outside his door. It was the sound of bare feet on hardwood, a slow, dragging gait. "Eloise?" he whispered into the stillness, the name of his wife dead these 20 years, escaping his lips before he could stop it. There was no answer, only the resumption of the shuffling, moving away now towards the stairs. A cold dread, thick and oily, began to uncoil in his stomach. He was alone in the house. He knew he was alone. He had been alone for 2 decades. Pushing himself up with a grunt, his joints protesting, he took his heavy iron poker from the fireplace and moved towards the door. The hallway was empty, shrouded in deep shadow. A single, dusty nightlight cast a feeble glow from the socket near the floor. He crept forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The shuffling was upstairs now, in the room that had been his daughter's, Sarah's room. It had been kept exactly as she left it the day she went off to college. A museum to a life interrupted. He hadn't had the heart to change a thing. The door to her room was ajar, a sliver of darkness showing. From within, he heard a new sound, the faint melodic tinkle of a music box. The little porcelain ballerina that had been Sarah's favorite. It hadn't been wound in 30 years. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird in a bony cage. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was exactly as he remembered it. The faded floral wallpaper, the small white desk, the bed with its ruffled pink comforter. And there on the nightstand, the music box was turning, its tiny dancer spinning in a silent, graceful pirouette. The air was frigid, far colder than the rest of the house. And on the bed, the comforter was depressed, as if someone had just been sitting there as he watched, paralyzed with a fear so profound it felt like a physical weight. The depression shifted, the fabric compressing as if an invisible body had just lain down. A soft, contented sigh whispered through the frozen air, a sigh he would have known anywhere. He stumbled back, the poker clattering to the floor, and fled down the stairs, his breath catching in ragged sobs. He didn't stop until he was locked in his own room. The lights blazing, the poker clutched in his hand once more. He spent the night like that, trembling in his chair, listening to the phantom footsteps pacing the floor above him, the occasional giggle of a little girl echoing down the stairwell. When dawn finally broke, pale and weak through the windows, the sounds ceased. The house was silent once more, just an old, empty house. But Arthur knew, with a certainty that chilled his soul, that he was not alone. He never had been. And on Halloween night, the veil was thin enough for the other residents to make themselves known. Hundreds of miles away, in a suburb so new the saplings in the yards were still supported by stakes, a young couple was preparing for their first Halloween in their first home. Mark and Chloe had scrimped and saved for years, and the little 2-story house with its blue shutters and big backyard felt like a dream come true. It was a fresh start, a blank slate. The previous owners, an elderly couple who had moved to a retirement community, had left it in immaculate condition. Almost too immaculate, Chloe had remarked once. It felt like no one had ever really lived there. Their excitement for the holiday was palpable. They'd bought a small mountain of candy, carved a lopsided but cheerful jack-o'-lantern, and strung orange and purple lights along the porch railing. As dusk fell on Halloween, they turned on the porch light, a signal of welcome in the gathering gloom. The first trick-or-treaters arrived, a cluster of tiny, Superheroes and princesses, their parents hovering at the end of the driveway. Mark and Chloe played their parts perfectly, oohing and eyeing over costumes, dropping handfuls of chocolate and sweets into outstretched bags. It was after 8 p.m. when the atmosphere shifted. The younger children had gone home, replaced by older kids in more elaborate, often gorier costumes. The air grew colder and a thin, creeping fog began to coil up from the ground, muffling sound and blurring the edges of the world. It was then that the first of the special trick-or-treaters arrived. He was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a suit that looked decades out of date. The fabric a dull, matte black that seemed to swallow the light. His face was obscured by an old-fashioned gas mask, the round glass eyepieces reflecting the Halloween lights in twin, distorted oranges. He didn't speak, simply held out a canvas satchel, not a plastic pumpkin or pillowcase. There was an intensity to his silence that was more unsettling than any monster mask. Chloe, her smile faltering, dropped a few candy bars into the satchel. The figure didn't move. He just stood there, his head tilted, as if studying her from behind the mask. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, he gave a single slow nod, turned, and melted back into the fog. "Okay, that was weird," Mark said, closing the door a little more firmly than necessary. "Just a creepy costume," Chloe replied, trying to sound convincing. "You know, high school kids trying to be edgy." But he came back. An hour later, the same tall, thin figure in the gas mask was at their door again. The same silent stance, the same outstretched satchel. This time, Mark felt a spike of irritation. "Hey, buddy, you already got yours. One stop per customer, okay?" The masked head swiveled towards Mark. There was no sound, no change in posture, but the air grew heavy. Chloe, peering from behind Mark, gasped and pointed. "Mark, his bag." The canvas satchel, which should have contained the candy they'd given him earlier, was empty, spotless, as if it had never held anything at all. A cold knot tightened in Mark's stomach. "Get lost," he said, his voice harder now. The figure lingered for another moment, then turned and disappeared, his form swallowed by the fog as if he had never been. The couple tried to laugh it off, to return to the festive spirit, but the joy had been leached from the evening. They decided to call it a night, turning off the porch light and retreating into the bright, warm safety of their living room. They were sitting on the couch, trying to distract themselves with a movie, when they heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound from the backyard. Scratch, drag, scratch, drag. It was the sound of something heavy being pulled across the patio stones. They looked at each other, their faces pale. Mark muted the television. The sound continued, slow, methodical, relentless. He went to the back window and peered through the blinds. The fog was thicker here, a swirling gray blanket. He could just make out a dark shape in the middle of their lawn. It was tall and thin. "It's him," Mark whispered, his breath fogging the glass. Chloe joined him, her hand flying to her mouth. The figure was digging. He had a long, sharp-looking implement, a shovel or a spike, and he was driving it into the earth, then dragging it back over and over. He wasn't just standing there. He was working. He was digging a hole in their backyard. Panic seized them. Mark called the police, his voice trembling as he described the intruder. The dispatcher was calm, assuring him a car was on its way. They waited, huddled together, listening to the dreadful scraping sound from their yard. It seemed to go on forever. Then, just before the flashing blue and red lights painted their walls, it stopped. The police found nothing. The backyard was empty. The lawn was undisturbed. Not a single blade of grass out of place. There were no footprints in the dew-kissed grass. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. The officers were polite, but Mark could see the doubt in their eyes. A Halloween prank, they suggested. A foggy night, an overactive imagination. After they left, Mark and Chloe tried to sleep, but it was useless. Every creak of the house was the intruder returning. Every shadow was his gaunt form. At around 3 a.m., exhausted but wide awake, Chloe went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed the sliding glass door to the backyard, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She froze. There, standing just on the other side of the glass, was the man in the gas mask. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring into the house. And in the faint moonlight that filtered through the fog, she could see that the ground at his feet was no longer pristine. A deep, dark hole about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide had been dug into the center of their perfect lawn. It was a grave, and he was just waiting, a silent sentinel for whoever was meant to fill it. The old county archive was a place of dust and forgotten things, a labyrinth of towering shelves stacked with ledgers, maps, and crumbling cardboard boxes. For a history student named Liam, it was a treasure trove. His thesis focused on local legends and their basis in historical fact, and he had spent the better part of a month buried in the archive's depths. Halloween Day found him there again, chasing a ghost of a story he'd found. Referenced in an 1898 newspaper clipping, it spoke of a harvest man, a spectral figure said to appear in the fields on the last night of October, a harbinger of a hard winter. The archivist, a perpetually weary man named Mr. Henderson, had been unusually taciturn that morning. Some stories are better left in the past. "Son," he'd muttered when Liam showed him the clipping. But Liam was young and driven, his skepticism a shield against superstition. He was sure the harvest man was just a folkloric personification of seasonal fears. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long, distorted shadows between the shelves, Liam finally found what he was looking for. It was in a box of unsorted materials from a long-defunct local historical society. Tucked between a ledger of farm equipment and a bundle of faded land deeds was a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was unmarked, the pages brittle and yellowed. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was a tight, elegant cursive, but the content was anything but. It was the diary of a farmer, Elias Hargrave, dated October 1898. The entries began normally enough, detailing the harvest, the weather, the price of grain. But as the month wore on, a frantic, paranoid tone began to creep in. Hargrave wrote of something watching him from the edge of the cornfield at dusk. A tall, still figure, thin as a fence post and dark as a starless night. He called it the Thin One. The entries grew more disjointed. October 28th. It stands at the property line. It does not move. It does not breathe. The crows will not go near it. October 29th. It is closer tonight. At the edge of the corn, I can see its shape against the sky. It has no face, only a long, dark hollow where a face should be. October 30th. It was at the window. I saw it. A long, pale hand pressed against the glass. It is not a man. It is a wrong thing. It wants the harvest, not the corn. The other harvest, the one beneath the soil. The final entry was for Halloween night, October 31st. The handwriting was a desperate scrawl, the ink blotted in places. It is in the house. I hear it on the stairs, a dry rustling like old corn husks. It knows I wrote it down. It wants the words back. It wants to be forgotten. God help me, it is at the door. The entry ended abruptly. A cold dread, far deeper than any he'd felt from a spooky story, washed over Liam. This wasn't folklore. This was the raw, terrified account of a man's final hours. He looked up. The archive was silent. Mr. Henderson must have left for the day, forgetting he was still there. The motion-activated lights in the distant aisles had switched off, leaving him in a small pool of illumination at his table, surrounded by a sea of darkness. He quickly gathered his things, stuffing the journal into his bag. He would take it with him, study it more under proper light. He needed to get out of there. The silence was absolute, a physical pressure on his eardrums. He started walking towards the main entrance, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the vast space. As he moved, the lights flickered on ahead of him and off behind, a wave of illumination that felt less like a convenience and more like a spotlight. He was halfway to the exit when he heard it, a soft, dry rustling from one of the aisles to his left. He stopped, his blood running cold. It was the exact sound described in the journal, like old corn husks. He held his breath, listening. Nothing. He forced himself to keep walking, faster now. The rustling came again, this time from his right, closer. He glanced down the aisle. It was empty, the shelves stretching into gloom. Panic began to set in. He broke into a jog, the lights stuttering on and off around him in a frantic rhythm. The exit door with its glowing red sign seemed a mile away, and then he saw it. At the far end of the aisle directly ahead of him, a figure stepped out from between two shelves. It was impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling lights 9 feet up. It was thin, so terribly thin, its limbs like knotted ropes. It was dressed in what looked like the tattered remains of a black suit, and its face was a smooth, featureless stretch of pale, waxy skin save for a long, vertical gash of a mouth. It stood perfectly still, blocking his path to the exit. Liam froze, a whimper escaping his lips. This was not a person. This was the thing from the journal. The thin one, the harvest man. It was real. Slowly, with a jerky, unnatural motion, it raised one of its long, spindly arms and pointed a single, bony finger directly at the backpack slung over Liam's shoulder. The bag containing the journal. It wanted the words back. It wanted to be forgotten. Liam turned and ran, plunging into a dark aisle to his left, abandoning all thought of the exit. He could hear it behind him. Not running, but moving with a swift, rustling glide, the sound of dead leaves skittering across pavement. He ducked and weaved through the maze of shelves, his heart trying to burst from his chest. He found a small windowless office, slammed the door shut and locked it, plunging the room into darkness. He huddled behind a desk, fumbling for his phone. No signal. He sat there in the pitch black, listening. For a long time, there was nothing. Then the rustling sound returned right outside the door. It stopped. Liam held his breath, praying, pleading with any god that would listen. Then a new sound began, a slow, deliberate scraping. Something thin and hard was being dragged down the length of the wooden door, from top to bottom, once, twice, a third time. He didn't know how long he stayed there, trembling in the dark. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Eventually, the sound ceased. The oppressive silence returned. He waited until a sliver of gray dawnlight appeared under the door before he dared to move. His body was stiff, his nerves shredded. He unlocked the door and peered out. The archive was empty, bathed in the cold, flat light of morning. He stumbled out into the main area. Everything was normal, quiet, still. He rushed towards the exit, his only thought to get into the sunlight, to get away from this place. He burst through the doors, gasping in the cool morning air. It was over. He was safe. He swung his backpack onto his shoulder, a gesture of habit, and felt a sudden wrong lightness. He stopped, his blood freezing in his veins. He slipped the bag off and opened it. His laptop was there, his notebooks, his pens, but the small leather-bound journal of Elias Hargrave was gone. In its place, nestled at the bottom of the bag, was a single dried-up stalk of corn, its husk brittle and brown. 3 stories separated by miles and years, bound by the thinness of the veil on a single sacred night. An old man learns that the ghosts he lives with are not just memories. A young couple discovers that their dream home has a nightmare waiting in its soil. A student of history finds that some histories are not meant to be studied, for they have a life and a hunger of their own. Halloween is not just about the monsters we dress as, but the ones that dress the world in their own eternal silent dread. And they are always there, waiting, just on the other side of the light, patient as the turning of the earth. They are the true residents of the dark. And one night a year, they remind us that we are merely guests,